Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and we are back with our comparative weapons and armors series. Today we're going to discuss two different kinds of polearms, namely the spear versus the Roman pilum. Alright, welcome back. Okay, so first of all, why such a comparison? I mean, a pilum is a javelin, it's a throwing weapon, while a spear is a hand-to-hand combat polearm. So these two weapons don't have much in common. Yes, they're both long, and yes, they are both similar in construction, but the way they are used in combat are completely different. So why such a comparison? Well, it might surprise you, but actually these two weapons have a lot in common, a lot more than you would think. Well, first off, I think the most important thing that I would like to say before starting the comparison is the fact that indeed the pilum is mostly used as a throwing weapon, but it is absolutely possible to use a pilum in hand-to-hand combat, just the same way you would use a spear. In fact, not only it is physically possible, it is feasible, but it was actually done, and we have documents, we have actual historical proof that Roman soldiers not only used their pila as a throwing weapon, but they also used it for other purposes, including hand-to-hand combat. And we find such proof in the Debello Gallico, the Commentarii Debello Gallico by Julius Caesar, as in fact in this book we have this very fact mentioned, the idea of Roman legionaries using the pila in hand-to-hand combat. The thing is though, that we are not talking, it actually surprises me that not many people know this, because if you think about this, we're not talking, first of all, we're talking about Julius Caesar. The Debello Gallico is a very important document as far as military warfare in Republican time is concerned. But what's really important is that he's not talking about a side battle, he's not talking about a very small situation, but we're talking about the siege of Alesia, or the siege of Alesia, however you want to pronounce it. One of the most important battles and sieges of ancient time, of classical times, which marked the end of Gallic independence, and which sees Roman legions, 12 Roman legions and some auxiliary cavalry facing a confederation of Gallic tribes led by Vercingetorix or Vercingetorix himself. Now, such victory was so important that even the Roman Senate actually granted 20 days of thanksgiving to celebrate Caesar and what he had achieved with this victory. So this is a very important battle. And in this battle we have mentions of legionaries deployed with their pila used for hand-to-hand combat. Now this is a very interesting side glance to the idea of how the pilum was used and why it was constructed that way. In fact, although it is rare, I'll give you that, but there are some examples of pila which actually had reinforcement for the hand, protection for the hand of the user, just in case the legionary was ordered to use the pila in hand-to-hand combat. And last but not least, it's very interesting because if you think about it, it's a very quick way to change your legionaries into spearmen. Quick and effective anti-cavalry possibility for whatever other reason that the situation may call. Because again, please consider that you can have the best strategy in the world for your war, you can employ the best tactics to your battles, but there will always be some variables, some things that you cannot control. And these variables, these X elements that you cannot predict, well, you need to be able to adapt to those, and that's when you see the true ability of a commander, and in this case a Roman general. So now that we see why it would be interesting to postulate the possibility of using a pilum in hand-to-hand combat, we have to consider how it differs from a spear in that matter. Well, first of all, we need to take into consideration the construction of the weapon. The balancement of the weapon is not a problem, and as you can see, I am able to perform the same exact moves that I would perform with a spear. Always keep in mind that my spear does need some fixing, as I said in my spear versus a Nodachi video, and I will fix it, so it's not in perfect condition, it's not in pristine conditions. But as you can see, I can operate both weapons quite easily, and I don't have any significant problem. The pilum is a quite nimble weapon to use, and it's quite easy to move around. It doesn't require too much strength, and it can be used both one-handed and two-handed. The pilum also have a butt spike, as you can see. Now personally, I think that this would be used mostly for thrusting it in the ground. It would not be very effective as a throwing implement if used on the opposite way, because the huge difference between the actual head of the pilum and the back of the pilum is the fact that the head is actually constructed in a pyramidal shape, which helps penetration. In fact, if we read the words of Vegetius in terms of the effectiveness of pilum, of the pila of old, then it does say that such pyramidal structure was used to penetrate armor. Now, Vegetius says that it penetrates armor, shields and horse armor easily. Now, easily, I'm not sure. I suppose it depends on the armor we're talking about, but it was definitely built for penetration. As we said, the pyramidal shape of the head point, or the tip of the pilum, is used to punch a hole in a shield or armor. Then you have the very thin shaft which penetrates and slides through, and the weight for the punch will be provided by the wooden part of the shaft. So the pilum is designed for that, and it's effective at penetrating. It's a penetration weapon. Now, interestingly enough, another interesting thing to take into consideration is the fact that yes, a spear is more optimal. Why? Because it has more range than a pilum. That is in fact probably one of the only problems with the pilum. It does have there is a significant difference in range, in the length of the weapon. But we do have to consider that at the time of the Romans, warfare was very close. In fact, they were using gladius. So for a Roman using a gladius, gladi for plural, so a Roman using a gladius, when he actually starts using a pilum, he's already increasing his range quite a lot compared to the sort of weapons that he was using. And the scutum is providing perfect protection. So Roman soldiers were used to close combat or closer combat, if you will, than others, even preceding ones, if we consider the times in which, during the Kingdom of Rome, where you had hastati, and of course you have hastati also during the Republican times, where we do need to keep, I'll make a video about this, but hastati in Republican times are not using the hasta. It's kind of funny, but that's how it works, because they take the name from the Kingdom of Rome hastati, who were using the hasta. So the hasta being the pole weapon or the spear used by the Romans. So the pilum is an interesting in-between, okay, and again, of course, it's used, its main function is to be thrown. Interestingly enough, though, we can say the opposite thing as well. A spear can be thrown just as much as a sword can be thrown. I mean, you can throw any weapon. You can throw an axe, you can throw a sword, you can throw a spear. There isn't any weapon that cannot be thrown, and some of these can be thrown effectively. So if you throw a spear, even a Greek spear, a sarissa or a dori, they can be thrown. Everything can be thrown. But of course, a pilum is constructed to be thrown mainly. So it will most likely exceed at that also, because if you throw a spear or whatever other kind of pole weapon, it has a problem. Once it penetrates the opponent's shield, for example, or whatever, it can be thrown back at you, whereas normally you can't do that with a pilum, because the pilum was studied for that. It was prepared for that in two ways, either by the long iron shaft, which was kept softer towards the base of the shaft so that it would bend upon impact, and then you couldn't throw it back to the Romans, and secondly because of the idea of, because you have to consider that a pilum, let me take my pilum, Here we are. So the head of a pilum is connected to the shaft by nails. Now, 3 iron nails. Now, they substituted, and some people say that it was an idea of Marius, the famous Roman general. Well, whether it's true or not, there's no way to verify that information, so we'll just say that yes, it was his idea, maybe. It was that they substituted one of the 3 nails with a soft wooden pin, which would break upon impact. What happens if you lose your main nail? This happens. Okay? This happens. So you can't use it against the Romans, that's the idea. So very intelligent design, so definitely more effective as a throwing weapon than any other. But yes, you can throw a spear and you can throw a sword if you wish to, or if the situation demands. So ultimately, out of the two, which one would I choose? This is the most difficult one to answer, I have to say, because in this case, differently from other weapon comparison that I've made, where I at the end make my mind and say I would use this rather than that, and often I say which one I would use for a duel and which one I would use for battle. In this case, it's very, very difficult to choose, very, very difficult to choose, because it will depend on the situation. Probably for a duel, I will go for a spear rather than a pilum, particularly if I'm considering hand-to-hand combat. But in a battle, and one or the other will depend on a huge variety of factors that we don't even have time to take into consideration now, but the terrain, the weather, who am I fighting with, what weapons have they got, what armors have they got, what about the numbers, how many people are there, who's my general, is there cavalry involved? There are so many things to take into consideration before one can make up his mind, that I would say I would choose to use a pilum, or to bring with me a pilum or a spear, depending on the situation. Now, of course, in ancient times, in classical times and medieval times, that was not something that the soldier, the common soldier, would choose. It would be chosen by his commanders and his officers. But at the end of the day, I think I would have to choose depending on the situation. I can't really make my mind and say I would definitely go for a pilum or I would definitely go for a spear. Alright then, noble ones, I hope that you enjoyed this brief comparison. I think it's brief. I mean, I don't know, sometimes I think it's brief and then it's like 20 minutes video, 20 minutes long video. It does happen, but what can you do? It's just what happens to us content creators. Thank you very much for watching. Which one would you prefer? Do you prefer the Roman pilum? Do you prefer the spear? Which one would you use? And most importantly, which one of these two weapons fascinates you the most? Well, let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for your support as always. Thank you for watching and thank you for your time. I will see you tomorrow for my next daily upload. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Walete!